You know what? I'm gonna start a timer. I'm I decided not to fix it because it would have just taken like 20, 30 minutes probably to
Fix
fix
what?
it.
What are we
I
fixing?
have I have driver and video card problems. It's happened to me 4 times now. I know how to fix it, but it takes a lot of time.
Ah,
So I'm on just without. I won't have a timer. I won't have a backup, but I will use this clock so I know.
you're running on backup power over here.
Yeah, I know. I mean, to be fair, like usually it's a luxury, all the stuff I have to. So
That's fair. That's fair. It's probably better than what I usually do, which is stare at the timer and think in mentally how much time do we have for certain segments while Santi's talking to me, and I lose track of what he says.
I know I can think of like 1.5 times where I've either repeated what you've said and realized it after it's over, and I'm sure there's like times 5 or 10 times that I haven't caught it. Does it happen a lot or just like a little bit?
A little bit. I wouldn't say a lot.
Once a month?
It's usually
Every 2 or 3 months?
Yeah, every 2 or 3 months. It's usually pretty seamless once it happens. It's almost like you're reinforcing what I've said, which actually works fairly well. You're gonna have to keep me on track on this one because we've got a lot of stuff we could talk about aside from the Chicago Fire, and I think we'll be plenty of time to deep dive into a lot of that stuff afterwards. It's been a strangely busy week. Like
I know.
there's a lot to talk about.
We could push the blocks out, honestly. I feel like we just talked about that 3-4 weeks ago.
Yeah, we could. I like that. I don't want to spend too much time on that. I just like that quote because it paints like a picture of what Carnell feels we're doing good and bad. Like I put that in there because it's not for the blocks. It's what Carnell thinks, like the fact that he thinks we're 4 or 5 points off where we need to be, but like also in that context, what we're doing good and what we need to improve on.
Okay.
Like
No,
that was a pretty that's a lengthy thing, but it's a direct quote, so that won't take long to.
Yeah.
If anything, a lot of the player stuff I think we can skip over
Cool.
because there's a few key players like Kuipers. We have to talk about him, Chichos, Kellen Acosta, Brian Gutierrez, those kinds of guys. But we don't have to go too deep into most of them.
Kuipers came this year, correct?
Yeah, he's their $12 million man.
How's he doing, man? I haven't had time to look at any of this stuff.
Not great. He only has 2 goals. I mean, he's like emblematic of the Fire. They're not great.
Yeah. Oh, I remember them talking about it and why they like called that he wasn't going to be good. Okay, cool. At least I have something to say. You'll probably already say it, but that's okay.
Well, I'm going to send you a link here real quick too in our chat that has the MLS season preview on the Fire, which is actually fairly still relevant. For better or for worse for them. When they were picked to perform anywhere from 10th to 14th in the conference, their season preview is still highly relevant.
Was it the MLS, like the extra? Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's what I read too.
Yeah,
totally. That's exactly what I was thinking of. It just feels like a home run.
Yeah,
it almost feels a lot like I think they're that confident about St. Louis City, or they were last year.
I still don't think there's any reason not to be confident. I mean, tied for fewest wins, yeah, but also tied for fewest losses. That's
Santi's point about whatever show I listened to last about the points at this stage of the season. That was encouraging.
Yeah, it really was. People forget that we started off super hot, but then we kind of fell off the wagon there for a handful of games.
Yeah. Okay. Whoa.
Ready
Den's Max TV spamming our comments.
Ooh, we've got a bot. That's cool. Bot on YouTube.
Golly, my stupid computer.
I can block them from here if you want me to. or put him in
No,
timeout?
it's my camera. I'm sure
No, no,
it's
no,
the.
not you. I'm not gonna. This guy who's spamming our YouTube.
Oh, I know what you meant. I'm mad at my camera right now and my
Oh, okay.
computer. It keeps freezing.
I'm gonna put Denz Max in timeout. I don't know what
Yeah.
that means, but I'm putting him in timeout.
Oh, I didn't know we could do that. I like it.
It's the 3 dots. I can either block him or put him in timeout, and I don't appreciate
Good.
you, Denz Max. Maybe I
All
do. I
right.
don't know.
Well, I don't have to hit record, so I'll just start. You ready?
Go for it.
Is Santi coming or no? Was he?
I don't think he's gonna make it because he had the Biz Dash run long. He might
Okay,
make it
cool.
for the wind down, but he said don't wait up.
Okay. Well, here we go. Welcome, everyone, to Flyover Footy on the big 550 KTRS. We're presented by Noble Ice Vineyards. I have my friend Matt Baker with me today to preview and get you guys ready for the Chicago Fire game this weekend in St. Louis. Matt, how's it going, man?
Fantastic. Excited to welcome Chicago for the first time to City Park. We've got a lot to talk about besides the Chicago Fire. I think it's going to be a pretty jam-packed episode. I've got my double nickel derby shirt on for those of you watching on our live stream. Throwback to the 2019 season where the Chicago Fire went down to St. Louis FC in the Open Cup. So I'm excited to make this a rivalry. And that if you're watching us on our live stream, and maybe this will make its way into the podcast description, but Bradley Carnell said last year that it's not truly a rivalry unless you have on-field action, both teams going blow for blow. And we haven't done that yet with Chicago. So this is the time coming to City Park in the form that they're in. They're ripe for the taking, and I'm excited to dig into it all.
Absolutely. And that statement even implies, in a way, we were saying before, that rivalry hasn't started yet. And maybe it should. Maybe we should be more angry. I think there was angry mentioned in some comments this week, actually, in the pressers. So we're going to dig into that. In fact, that's a good transition. Let's go straight into some of the player availability updates, and we'll talk about some of the things Carnell said this week.
We've got three main players that we're tracking injury-wise: Edu Leuven, Jabulu Blom, and Josh Yarrow. On Tuesday this week, Leuven and Blom returned to training as neutrals. We talked about this a little bit on our newer midweek show, but Bradley Carnell said neither was being pushed. One is a little bit further along than the other, but we presume it's Jabulu Blom. He continues to say Edu Leuven is tracking on 2 different levels, kind of that personal and professional healing level. On Thursday, though, Bradley Carnell, in the press room, when I asked him the updates on Blom and Leuven, said he was out of breath. And he said they're doing good. I did extra work with them just now, and he was out of breath as he was saying this because he literally just came from the field at City Park working with those two. He said they're working hard, inching ever so closer. We still have a day to decide if they're part of the roster or not for this weekend. They've had a good week in training with us introducing them as neutrals through the week. He feels they're being given good space, and they're almost ready to execute real live game minutes. They have one final day to see if they can do that. On Thursday, it was notable that they were without that neutrals designation. And Bradley Carnell said, yeah, it's good to progress. Good to see guys coming to the coaches saying, I'm ready to go to the next level. He had a quick chat with the medical staff to make sure that they're working within their limitations of those players, what they can do, and then set them free and see if they can do that. It's a good feeling because they know how strong they can be as a collective unit, and that's what they strive for. And having Leuven and Blom do that is really reassuring. So I would not count on them for this weekend, but with 3 matches in 8 days coming up, I think it's a really good sign that Blom and Leuven have both lost that neutral designation, which is kind of the last barrier before you might start to see a game day roster.
When you start licking your chops for whatever comments come every this next following week, for sure. This has been kind of the biggest ongoing story, I'd say, for St. Louis City this year, is just following Leuven and all the injuries week to week, which it's nice that it hasn't been a ton of guys 1 week or several weeks. It's been just a couple, and we've just had to kind of keep up with who they are at different points. Leuven being the longest one in, the most important one, unfortunately. Right. So this is a fun story because I saw.
Is it?
No, it's not. It's not at all. I absolutely was being sarcastic.
It started off as a fun story.
It did, exactly. That's what I was going to say, that I saw Tom Timmerman post pictures of a beautiful field. You also, shortly after, post pictures of a beautiful field. And I think, oh, great. Boy, that looks wonderful. And then Klaus does what the
So
marketing
promising.
department does not want to happen, right?
Things were so promising. I mean, they had training at City Park on Thursday. Bradley Carnell said they wanted to give the team a chance to get acclimated to the new pitch. It's obviously brand new grass, new turf that they had installed. And Bradley Carnell said to kick off his press conference that the field was good, and he didn't have anything negative to say. He said they wanted to get the players out there, acclimated, learn the tendencies of the field, and then Klaus walks in and has his presser, and at the very end has the quote of all quotes, saying, "Unfortunately, the field is not ready yet. Outside, it looks good, but it's not ready. These are things we can't decide. But last time the field was in its best condition, it needs time to fit." He's not giving any excuses. Klaus was very specific about that, but he was just very seemingly disappointed in what the field conditions for the players look like. And this was on the heels of, we got to see a little bit of training in the stadium. And, just watching the players, you can hear certain things. You hear things like, I heard Indiana Vasilev comment to everybody else saying it feels like a sandbox, which isn't totally surprising. Probably laid
Ooh.
some sand down on the field, and maybe it was a reference to how quickly the ball was moving or not moving, or responding or not responding. And then Tim Parker made some quip to the team about who's going to be the first to tweet about the field. And you have those and you think, okay, I don't know what they really mean. It may be good, it may be bad. And then you enter Klaus being as direct as humanly possible about what the field conditions are. Now, to the credit of everybody here, this was being said on Thursday, and we know the amount of rain that St. Louis has had this week after that field was installed. I mean, it's likely that it was waterlogged to an extent, but we have 2 or 3 days of beautiful sunlight, warm weather ahead of us. And so the hope is that by Saturday night, that sun coupled with the lack of rain will do wonders for the field and allow it to heal up, I guess is the better term. And the thing that I think the fan base is really talking about right now is, with this information, it's gone from, okay, we've tore up the field. We heard what Josh McPherson said. We heard what the team said about why they needed to do this. The turf that they had installed had like a 2-year shelf life. It was this brand new turf. They're trying to get something started at City Park. And so it didn't have a long shelf life. It had been here for 2 years. This was the best opportunity with the team being away for 3 or 4 weeks. And so they pulled the trigger. They had it installed. And now it's, why would you do this in the middle of the season?
Yeah.
And a lot of McPherson's old quotes go back to being proactive before issues arise, because if they were to wait until League's Cup, for instance, then it likely would have been tore up. Issues would have started to arise, maybe injury concerns, and the field would have gotten really, really bad condition. And so you look now to Josh McPherson's old quote saying how St. Louis is in the transition zone when it comes to grass growing, and the ideal time to change it being with the temperature, with the weather. April is kind of right there in the sweet spot of getting new grass in, getting it acclimated, letting it take hold. And the work that he had done previously with 2 types of grass in the fall and the spring, and how that both cold and warm weather grass, the Bermuda grass, was needing to be managed so tightly. And now you're transitioning it to this new grass that you're laying in April. I think that is the reason why you couldn't do this in the off season. It's St. Louis. Imagine trying to lay grass, get it to grow, take hold, and grow as you need it to, if you're planting it in January or December, because that's the time you're really looking at here. If we've had this in for 2.5 weeks, I think at this point, and think about how much time we really had in the off season, November, December, January. That's it. These are cold times. The weather is not going to be able to do what it needs to do. And so that's my not professional opinion on why this had to be done at some point during the season, if they were going to do it, and then go back to being proactive to not allowing the field to deteriorate. To Klaus's point of, the field was great when it was tore up. So now you just have to hope that, in addition to Klaus's point and the joking of the team of how the ball plays on the field, you just hope that accompanying that isn't any injury concerns.
I remember the City Voice where they talked to McPherson. I think it was City Voice, but
Yeah.
I enjoyed that podcast immensely. I think a lot of dads out there did. And I remember him saying, you know what's a better time than September to plant grass? And he said, next September. So, clearly he's not doing what he would choose, in a vacuum, right? He's choosing something, the next best thing. And maybe between now in September and October, and the playoffs going straight into February. Just think about the schedule, guys. I mean, this guy's not, he's being pigeonholed and he's doing the best he can, and
Right.
I'm sure it'll be good very soon. I have no doubts about it. But I will say about a sandy feeling pitch is, I just did a hike out at Zion National Park. And sometimes there are stretches of these hikes in the desert areas where you're walking on sand and it just like wrecks your muscles. You move,
Mm.
2/3 the speed. There's
Mhm.
no bounce in your step anymore. And you might be tired and it just sucks the life out of you when you're on your like 15th, 16th mile or something like that. So, these guys are athletes. They notice a difference in every minute detail of a pitch. But that said, we're used to USL fields, guys. We come from St. Louis FC, and so not much, no excuses from Klaus, and you're not going to get much pity from me either. You guys are living in the good world. So, both teams are playing on the same pitch. No complaints from me. I think a classic St. Louis blowing things a little out of proportion, but it also shows how much we care, doesn't it, Matt?
Knee-jerk reactions abound, and that's the mark of a passionate fan base.
All right, well, that's the silliest news this week for sure, and I'm glad we covered it thoroughly. But let's talk about Marco Royce. Let's not call this silly. Let's call it crazy and fun. Any other adjectives you'd like to add here?
We're a part of the hot stove season when it comes to the global soccer landscape, the global football landscape, and I'm excited for it. I think this is a fascinating rumor, and we should deep dive on this a little bit further. Let's have a conversation on our wind down, because on the Big 550 KTRS, we only have so much time for talking about this and then Chicago Fire preview. But if you're interested listening to this before the game on the Big 550 KTRS, tune into our podcast, where on our wind down, we're going to dig a little bit more into Marco Royce. But what you need to know is May 8th was a tumultuous day for St. Louis City fans, as the one and only Fabrizio Romano reported that Marco Royce is considering a move to MLS after leaving Borussia Dortmund as a free agent at the end of the season. And Samir Nasri revealed on Canal Plus that Royce told him about potential MLS moves, as talks had already taken place. Fast forward to a couple hours later on May 8th, Tom Bogert, Tommy Scoops, says that St. Louis City has had those preliminary talks with Borussia Dortmund legend Marco Royce. The process is very early, and Royce is considering a wide range of options to continue his career. He turns 35 this month, and mentioned how he has 169 goals and 130 assists in 426 appearances with Dortmund. The other notes on this are a little bit kookier, and it relates to his friendship with Roman Berkey, which is well noted. Berkey famously, when Royce announced he was leaving Dortmund, had the Instagram post saying, with the hearts, the my captain, those kinds of things, and just revering Royce. The friendship is unparalleled without question. There's an outlet in Germany, Bild, that had reported Roman Berkey saying things like, "I'm trying everything. I keep sending him messages. We're always in contact, but we're also not a club that spends a lot of money. We're at the bottom of the salary ranking. I told Marco that I would give him the captain's armband right away. I'm trying to make it appealing to him, but of course, we're not the only team interested in a player like him." Now, obviously, if that was said, it was tongue in cheek, in jest, just going to the fact that Berkey wants his friend on the team and how much he respects Royce and knows how much he still has to offer in this kind of system. And so, being 34, 35 this month, Royce still measures up extremely well against other attacking midfielders in the Big Five, Euro Leagues, Champions League, Europa League. He's on a high salary, but a salary that was mirroring what Roman Berkey was on when he left Dortmund. And the big questions around Marco Royce right now aren't necessarily talent-wise. They might not even be salary-wise. If St. Louis is able to either if CK is able to be talked into spending, or if they're able to talk him down into a Max Tam type deal like Berkey, it's more along the lines for me of, is the risk worth the reward with the age, the injury history of the ankles and knees, and the ability when you bring him in, what that looks like for the overall team. I think the idea of a player of the caliber and talent of Marco Royce joining and what he could do to the attacking midfield, especially underneath a player like Klaus, or heck, underneath anybody. I mean, the style of play that Dortmund runs, they have been adept at pressing, and Royce has experience in this type of a system. So it's not like his legs would be just like a Luis Suarez type situation. And so I think bringing Royce in would be a game changer in how Lutz has approached building a roster. But if you, and we know St. Louis has reportedly already had conversations, But on the other side of this, if you're saying, well, there's no way we could bring Marco Royce in because Lutz has already said multiple times that's not how he's building the roster. He's looking to younger players. He's not going to give a player his last contract. If you say you're pigeonholing Lutz into those few things that he said once, and you're saying he can't be flexible, what are you really saying about the ability for your sporting director to think on his feet and to adapt to a changing landscape of who's available? I think that would be more detrimental to say he said this in the past and we're sticking to it than it would be to say Marco Royce could be the exception.
Yeah, absolutely. Completely agree with you. I'll just say that Marco Reus has had as few as 11 Bundesliga appearances in a season and as many as 32. And often it's in the upper teens and mid to high 20s in appearances. So that's just one thing. That's in the last 5 or 6 years. But I will ask you, Matt, preliminary conversations. Do you think that's with Lutz or do you think it's just with Berkey? Like, what kind of attention are people trying to garner here with tricks?
I think the preliminary conversations would have been with Lutz.
Okay.
I think the conversations with Berkey are a different type of conversation entirely, and you can't categorize those as preliminary because they're old friends. And so this is Berkey selling Royce on coming to St. Louis, and it is at the very least Royce giving his good friend the professional courtesy of entertaining his boss in trying to pitch him. That's bare minimum in my book. And you're right, Royce hasn't played a ton of games. He hasn't put in a lot of mileage compared to earlier in his career, like when he was on the cover of FIFA in 2017, those kinds of things. But Roman Berkey was a backup for a year and a half, 2 years before he came here. So the concept, it doesn't translate perfectly to a goalkeeper position, obviously, but the concept of bringing over a player who is 35 years old, has experience in the attacking pressing type play, is used to putting on miles, that doesn't say he can't translate that to MLS, because we look at what Miami is doing with their cabal of wrong side of 35 players, and they don't run the same style. They're not as quick as us. They don't run their players into the ground, but those players can still talent-wise dominate against their opposition. And it's not like Marco Royce would ever be asked to play 90 minutes. Look at our attackers right now. We don't ask 4 out of 5 attackers for St. Louis right now to go 90 minutes. How many subs do we make per game? About 5. How many of those subs are our attacking players? About 4. And so you're not looking to really change the model in having a player go more than 60, 70, 80 minutes. And then you don't have to, I mean, there's lots of options we can get into if we start to really look at this in depth about how the minutes can be managed. But if you're looking at bringing the guy of Royce's talent into St. Louis, this is something I think you really have to see it through and see how you can make this work with the roster build, which we are going to get into on the wind down.
Absolutely. Yeah. And so the wind down, if you're listening on the big 550 KTRS, you might be we do a wind down, and it's on our podcast only. It's a more free form conversation after the actual episode you're listening to now on the radio. And so please do check that out on the podcast. I think we're going to talk a lot about, is it feasible on the salary? Is he going to translate to our style of play? All these kinds of things will be really fun to talk about, and you can get my opinion and Matt's opinion, whatever you think that's worth, which will be fun. I look forward to it today. Matt, let's move on to the preview of Chicago, which is the game coming up. This is the most important stuff you can kind of gather from us today, as you might be even riding to the park here, listening to the Big 550 KTRS. Matt, get us started with St. Louis City and where we stand and where Chicago stands in the standings and such.
Let's go. St. Louis City comes into this holding firm in 9th place in the West with a 2-1-7 record in 10 games, 13 points, and a +1 goal differential, having scored 15 goals. They have a 2-0-3 home record, so we are undefeated at home. Our form in the last 3 games, we've defeated Austin 1-0. We drew SKC away 3-3, and we drew Houston 0-0 last week. St. Louis is one of 2 teams in MLS with only 1 loss on the season, and they're also tied for the least amount of wins. Columbus being the only other team, so St. Louis is the only team in the West with 1 loss. Something to hang our hats on in the midst of all of these 7 draws. Chicago, on the other hand, the team that we are less familiar with, because this is not the same Chicago as it was the last time we saw them, both personnel-wise, maybe form-wise, but definitely not personnel-wise. 13th in the East on a 2-5-4 record, They have one more game played than City. They have 10 points, a -8 goal differential, 11 goals scored, 19 goals allowed, and are 0-2-3 away. So they have yet to win a game away. Kind of matches up fairly well. Their last 3 games, a doozy of a loss against RSL 4-0. They drew Atlanta United 0-0 and lost to New England 1-0 last week. It was especially disappointing in their last 3 games were at home and they couldn't find a result here. So their last win this season was against the Houston Dynamo on April 7th. And coincidentally, that was also the last time they scored a goal. It's been over a month since they've scored at all. So you're looking at a Chicago Fire team who's poor on the road. They have been poor in their past few games, and they can't figure out how to score a goal. So you look at what they might be doing, some key notes in Chicago, and what we can look forward to them doing. Bradley Carnell said on the ball, they're good, fluid attacking players that they have, like Brian Gutierrez, Chris Miller, and Kellen Acosta, really calling out their midfield at good ball handlers. Said they're feisty and they can control the game with Kellen Acosta in the midfield, especially. Off the ball, they're good at accelerating when they need to, and they move as one in the pressing. And that's something we're going to get into, and it's going to be a theme here, is the type of press that the Chicago Fire offer, because if you get to some of these underlying metrics in possession, in PPDA, in overall how they progress the ball and where their point of attack is, it's not too dissimilar from St. Louis City. So ultimately, this is going to be a game, I think, that whose style can win out, because you can't have 2 teams sub 50% possession. Somebody's going to have to give, and who's going to be able to dictate that kind of pace. Chicago this year has had a lack of goal scoring, poor play on the road. The possession's been all over the place. So they do seem like they are more adept to allowing teams to dictate the style of play, the pace of play, more so than their ability to put their style onto other teams. But they've been good 1v1 on the ball. They have a disruptive press, and so they have caused fits to teams in Chicago's attacking end. If they can get the ball, and when they lose possession, especially, if they can get on the ball in their attacking third, they can be a little dangerous. There's a key stat that we're going to talk about later in high turnovers that is very fascinating, that really helps describe this Chicago Fire team. Personnel-wise, the Fire come into this marginally healthy. They're missing a few of their key players. We found out this week that Rafael Chichos, Shaqiri, and Javier Quesas were training with the group this week. So they look to play. They look to be okay. Shaqiri didn't start the last game. But Marin Hiles Selassie and Gaston Jimenez worked out on the side. They're potentially less likely if you think about what working out on the side means for St. Louis City players in Leuven and Blom. Haile Selassie and Jimenez may be longer shots to play. And Haile Selassie, obviously, notable in that regard, as he's one of the better midfielders that Chicago Fire have.
Brian Gutierrez finally working Shaqiri out of the game a little bit. I know that's been the other way around, where Gutierrez couldn't play in his normal position, and now looks like Shaqiri might be fading out a little bit. Who knows? Maybe he'll start the rest of the season, and I'll be wrong. But Matt, I know we've got a lot more to talk about with Chicago and styles of play. Do you want to move on to the next portion here?
Yeah, while we're talking about Chicago, let's just touch on who their key players are, who we're supposed to be watching for here. And the Fire have been consistent in parts of their offense in their starting 11. So some of the players to watch for who have really played a decent amount this year: Alan Aragani, number 27 defender; Rafael Chichos, like I said, number 5 defender. They both started all 11 games. Fabian Herbers is a forward. He started all 11 games. Hugo Kuipers is a player that is maybe one of the top 3 players to watch. He was their club record $12 million signing from Ghent in Belgium. That's Hugo Kuipers, number 9. He's their DP forward. He only has 2 goals on the season, so he hasn't been effective in being able to be found up the field. So when Carnell talks about their midfielders in Gutierrez, Acosta, in progressing the ball and holding the ball, they haven't been able to find service into their number 9. And if you're a St. Louis City fan listening to this and you're thinking, oh, their club record $12 million signing isn't able to find net, they're not able to find him well, he only has 2 goals on the season, you start to feel a little bit better about what we're getting from Klaus at this moment in time, at least in comparison. Maybe you expect yourselves to be better than Chicago in every way, but the Hugo Kuipers situation in Chicago is fascinating to watch. So that's why he's kind of one of the targets to watch. $12 million signing, number 9. Other players, I think you mentioned Brian Gutierrez. A lot of people are familiar with him with his national team experience and the midfielder. He can play centrally, out on the wing. He's good on the ball in possession. And when he's not on the ball, he's good at getting in behind players in transition. What we've seen this year is teams have typically matched up overloading players like Shaqiri and Kuipers. And because of that, Gutierrez has often drawn 1v1 coverage. So allowing Brian Gutierrez space is going to be something that St. Louis has to watch for, because they do have attacking threats. They haven't been able to string things together, but you're looking at Brian Gutierrez as their leading goal scorer with 3. You're looking at Haile Selassie, Herbers, and Shaqiri having 2 assists. So the volume of key passes, the volume of shots, their goal scoring hasn't been there, but the talent is clearly there. You just hope that you're not the team that they put it all together against.
Yeah, but I think we talked about this article from the MLS, I guess, armchair. Goodness gracious, Matt Doyle, I think, did this article, and he was definitely saying on the podcasts about Chicago in the previews at the beginning of the season that just like creating chances, having a playmaker is just like something they've not nailed. They haven't found anyone at all. And I think they thought Shaqiri was going to fill that role and maybe Gutierrez would take it from him. And we're seeing so far this season, it hasn't happened. They called that it wasn't going to happen, just like bad, player decisions on purchases and things like that, transactions. And so far it looks like it's not going to happen. I don't think they're going to put it together as far as that's concerned. But I did find it really interesting that you compared it to Klaus and the stuff that's been coming out from Backfield. I think we talked about that article. I thought made a really good point. Now, City is creating chances, and you differentiated that from them being dangerous chances. I forgot the term you used, the stat that you used. I'll give you a chance to mention it here again, but it's interesting that perhaps Klaus is doing some playmaking and trying to score at the same time. Perhaps our playmakers aren't quite getting the dangerous playmaking done. But how does that compare to Chicago, in your opinion? I think it's a fun parallel here.
Well, the problem that Chicago's having is their inability to create chances. So they're one of the lower teams as far as key passes goes. They're, in fact, 5th from the bottom of the league in number of key passes generated, which are basically passes that lead to a shot. St. Louis, by turn, is top 5, and top 3 in key passes per game. So they're generating all of these chances as far as volume. Now, the problem that St. Louis has isn't the ability to generate chances. And Bradley Carnell has talked ad nauseum about this. It's the quality of their chances. And that is what the Backfield article really got to, is saying that I think on average, we were averaging less than 0.06 XG per shot. And you might be thinking, all right, what's the context for that? Because 0.06 sounds really bad, but what's the context? Well, 0.1 is a pretty decent shot opportunity. And so individual shots that have 0.1 XG, you can kind of translate that to, that was a pretty good opportunity. You'd be upset if you had a handful of those and you didn't score, especially if you had 10 or more and didn't score, because that's 1 total XG. Now, last game we had St. Louis, there were only 3 total shots of the 18 or so that were above 0.1 XG, and they were all in the second half. Klaus's shot that he skied that was almost a sitter in the box was a 0.22 XG. So if you think back to that shot that he had on the right side of the box, that was a really high quality chance, and the underlying metrics reflect that. So the narrative now for St. Louis is that we don't have a problem in creating chances. We don't have a problem in getting the ball into the final third, but it's the quality of the final touch and the decision-making in that final third that's lacking. And I tried to ask Klaus something about this in the press conference, where I was really wanting to get at, how does the thought process go when you have the ball or you're looking for the ball and you need to determine, are you going to shoot the ball or are you going to pass the ball? And he really went back to the fundamentals of it all. It's not as complicated as I think I want to make it at times. It's just, you're a professional footballer. You have all this experience in game flows, in moments, in instances, and what the defenses are giving you. And so it's almost an instinct at that point, in addition to just field vision of where the other players are around you. Do you see an open man? Do you have, are you talking to another player like Saleo and Klaus? Are you talking in a different language maybe that they can't understand? And so you're able to get in behind them and create space. Do you have another player to do that, or do you need to take it yourself? And he really boiled it down to just being that simple. It was, you use all this knowledge that you have, all the experience that you had, and you just have to take it in the moment. He even said it's easy for us as fans, as analysts, to go back and to rewatch and to slow things down, but take a step back and think about what they're doing out there. They're in one moment, and that's why Carnell calls these moments so important, because it's in the flow of play. You're going 10, 15 miles an hour with your body, and you need to figure out what to do in that specific moment. And that's why Carnell is so positive about all the chances creating and talking about all the good things that's happening. Is he's waiting for either Lady Luck or the right angle to fall. The decision making isn't really being questioned by Carnell. It's confidence, it's consistency, and in continued volume. In fact, Bradley Carnell, we know that he likes to look at the season in blocks of 5. Well, we've come up to the end of the second block of games. And Bradley Carnell said that ideally they're about 4 or 5 points off where they'd like to be, which would put them in a top 4 position. Shameless plug, this is where I guessed our goal was to be in a top 4 based on what he had said before. But this was kind of confirmed that we're a few points behind. And so he didn't go to, we need to get outside of ourselves to gain these points back. It's more, we need to be continuing to find out why we're dropping points. And he reiterated that they can't look at what has been or where they were or feel they need to be right now. They're getting these in the box entries. They're getting these shots on frame. They're creating the moments we talked about. They're preventing second chance opportunities by and large in the defensive box. So he even tied it back to playing well in both boxes, controlling both boxes. And he said that these players are artists. They're creative. They need to paint the mural that they can. And they're painting it in the defensive end. I really like this quote a lot because he said they're painting it in the defensive end. You can see that success in the clean sheets and the lack of shots being allowed, but they need to paint it in the offensive end. And this is where the Klaus conversation and the players around him, Salio, Indy, Alm, Sam, any of these guys come into it saying they need to paint it in the offensive end, whether that's bringing a teammate into play, offering themselves, you as the person on the ball in as a near post run, or, and this is probably my favorite quote that he had, if you're the one to see the moment, then you seize the moment. And I think that really gets to what he's trying to get at is if you have the confidence that you see a moment in front of you, take it. And he's going to continue to tell his players to take that moment because he believes in the talent level that's here with the players. He believes that what happened last year wasn't a fluke when you have a Klaus who was injured most of the season, still able to get back 10 goals. He knows the skill is there, and he's going to still tell his players to take those chances when they see them.
Yeah, it's really interesting too. I enjoyed what you said about Klaus's comment because it does bring in the fact that, you know, they're artists, they have experience, they're professionals, and they take what they're given and they do the best they can, and they're good at what they do. So trust, you know, what they do without slowing it down and overthinking it. You know, I can't avoid overthinking it. It's just in me. But he mentioned, you know, based on what it's given to you. And it's interesting because we've seen it game by game. Is Klaus going to lead the line? Is he going to be slightly removed? Is Sam going to come back and be that leading the line guy so that Klaus can make some more? Is Sam going to be able to finish the ball? Is he going to play in a way that Bradley Carnell is happy with and still score, right? And same for Klaus. Is like, do we want him to make more? Do we want him to score the goals more? Is he off on scoring goals, or is he just trying to do too much? There's a lot going on here, and I think a lot of it also just has to do with who's around him, who's able to score those goals, if not him, who's able to make, if not him. And I think that's just something they're working through. And I think that's why it is kind of like moving around. Things are changing from week to week. It's not in positions exactly, but just the way that Klaus is playing and moving subs in and out and just trying things. It's just, how many times do we mention, like, we've clearly identified a problem. Bradley admits there's a problem, right? And says, we have been working on it. We're clearly working on it some more. And eventually they do work it out. And I think you were getting to that too, Matt, that, you know, clearly Klaus can be out for a long time and score 10 goals after that. And so, you know, I'm positive as well as you, but I am going to enjoy overthinking these things. And I think the comments kind of help.
Well, and you have to remember too that the attacking four that we've found consistency with in the past 3 games with this same starting lineup of Salio, Indy, Alm, and Klaus, it wasn't there last year. So Klaus wasn't scoring goals with this crew underneath him. You know, you had AZ in there, you had Sam there, you had Nico Gioacchini in there for large stretches. You had a second striker playing off of you. Rasmus Alm didn't play a lot. He offers something vastly different than either Indiana Vassilev or Nico Gioacchini. And so part of this is finding out that you're creating these chances with these 4 players, but how can you make them better, get more quality with these 4 attackers, because they may be your best 4 attackers that you have on the team right now. I mean, you could easily look at AZ Jackson, you could look at Sam Adeniran, and bringing in those caliber of players. And Edu Leuven, when he comes back, is going to have an impact, which might move Thomas Ostrak higher up the field. You don't know. And it's gelling with those players. and just being a little bit more comfortable because there is a difference in how we're playing last year, especially Klaus. Klaus is not playing the same type of a role last year, this year that he did last year. Part of that is coming back to the ball a little bit more, asked to play make, especially when Sam's in. He's been asked to play number 10 quite a bit more. And so having that inconsistency in what he's being asked to do, but still being consistent in knowing that that's what he's going to be asked, if that makes sense. So it's like he's tasked with doing different things at different times, being the out and out number 9, being the number 10, but he's aware that that's coming. He knows he's going to be called upon to do that. And so it's shifting the mindset, which is kind of an interesting role for a striker to have.
Yeah. And if I can throw a grenade, like what does Cedric Tukert do to all of this? Who knows? It could solve every problem without even trying. It's a fun one to think about. Matt, we've got a few minutes before we give our predictions. If you want to do one quick topic ahead of that.
Yeah, let's look into my stat of the night real quick. I mentioned that the Chicago Fire on paper seem like they have a lot of similarities to St. Louis, but I want to look at the fact that the number of high turnovers forced between Chicago Fire and St. Louis City is almost identical. These are the number of sequences that start in open play and begin 40 meters or less from the opponent's goal. So if you can think about where the line of engagement is on the field, how high up that has to be if you're beginning 40 meters or less from your opposition goal. The Chicago Fire actually lead the league in this stat with 131 high turnovers forced, averaging about 11.9 per game, though none have ended in a goal. St. Louis is second in the league with 112 turnovers high up on the field, 11.2 per game. So just 0.7 high turnovers per game separate these two teams. However, while the Chicago Fire have not ended any of these in a goal, St. Louis has 5 of these high turnovers forced that have ended in a goal. They lead the league in this stat. And so you can say that the area of engagement might be similar, but the way that these two teams are clinical in what they do afterwards is vastly different. And the Chicago Fire like to take the ball, and when they're doing their pressing, if they create these high turnovers, they'll still go a little quicker in their attacking end because their possession happens in the defensive end. You can look at their zone of control, just similar to St. Louis, is that they possess until midfield. St. Louis doesn't quite possess that much. Their areas of control are a little further deeper in their field. Chicago possesses to about halfway through the field, and then they just split up. They just immediately make a run for it, go towards goal after that. And they haven't been clinical in finding those opportunities to even create in anything in the final third. So some of the keys that St. Louis is going to have to do is dictate their style. When both teams come into this averaging less than 50% possession, the team that dictates their style sticks to their game plan better. They come out strong. They come out early with their counter and quick opportunities that catch Chicago high. They need to beat the Chicago Fire press. St. Louis is undoubtedly going to try that with longer progressive passes or winning some aerial duels. This isn't a team that's going to be playing short passes to get around the press. They're going to send the ball along. So how can they be successful? They continue to win aerial duels. The key is to get their front line in good positions, 1v1 to win those duels, and for the support attackers to then find a good amount of space to work in behind the press. If St. Louis can force Chicago to remain deeper, put pressure in their attacking half, St. Louis's attacking half, even possession in the attacking third, they're going to throw Chicago off their game because Chicago does not want to keep the ball in their defensive end any more than St. Louis does. And so St. Louis may need to find that 1 or 2 additional passes in the attacking third, if for nothing else than because Chicago doesn't handle that well. They push their fullbacks up just as much as St. Louis, and so there's space to work with back there. And this is where a tandem like Thomas Totland and Rasmus Alm can really do some damage on that left side when you're looking at the fact that the Chicago Fire have a left side defender in Andrew Gutman, who come over from Colorado. He's meant to be pushing higher up on the field. He's a goal scorer by trade, not unlike Thomas Totland. Take advantage of that on the right side for St. Louis. It's a huge area of opportunity in a battle that I really look for is the right side of St. Louis and what they can do, because you can kind of know what Chicago is going to offer. They just haven't been successful at doing that so far.
Really awesome analysis there, Matt. I think more than any other game you've kind of called things on, it sounds like that's exactly, to me, that's what I would absolutely guess would happen based on some of the research you've done here. Really good stuff. And it's really smart too for the Chicago Fire. If you don't have a playmaker, like going heavy on the press, that's not what they were like last year. You know what I mean? That's really smart to kind of do that. So perfect. Are you ready for predictions?
Let's do it. I'll go ahead with my starting 11 if you don't mind.
Yeah, go for it.
I like Roman Burke in net, obviously. A very similar lineup. Anthony Marcanic, Joachim Nilsson, I have back in there. I think he's might be good to go, or
Got
as
it.
good to go as he needs to be to start. Tim Parker, Thomas Totland, no changes there. Chris Durkin, Tomas Ostrak in the midfield. I don't think either Edu Leuven or Jabulu Blom are going to be ready to dress this week. That pushes our attack. I like Indy on the left, AZ central, Alm on the right, and Klaus up top. This is, I believe, the lineup that we ran against FC Dallas about a month ago that generated 27 shots and no goals. So again, the volume of shots, the volume of chances are there. I like the spark that AZ brought in at the end of last game. I say reward him a little bit. This doesn't have any implications on Celio Pompeu. It is strictly managing minutes and using a stronger AZ that came into the back half of last game. And I just like the idea of the crosses that Indy can deliver on the left, because I made a big deal when Indy started on the left the last time that his role in the game shifted from direct to goal with that inversion on the right side because he's a left-footed player. When he's on the left, he's more outstretched on the wing, able to send in crosses. And I think that has some interesting. I think we can work with that pretty interesting ways with Klaus if we can get in behind the two center backs who are going, not unlike Parker and Nilsson, are going to be the main defenders for Chicago.
Interesting. So I want to ask you a question to kind of frame my lineup here. What did you think was more effective in the last game, the first half or the second half? Basically, Pompeu and AZ, because they subbed him in at the half, and that never happens, right?
And it was like for like. Yeah, AZ went to the left.
Yeah. So what did you think was better?
I liked how we performed in the second half better.
Yep, me too. So I have a couple. I think we're going to go right to that formation because I don't think it was an accident. I think it was like, hey, let's try something different and see what works better. And in this case, I think AZ is a good starting type player. And I think Celio is a really good sub type player. And I've changed my mind on that on and off twice this season. But for now, I'm going to stick with that. And I liked AZ staying on the left like it was like the second half last time. And I'm enjoying Indy in the middle. It just feels a little more secure. I think his playmaking, like, do you remember that outside of the foot? I mean, he used his left foot. He went out of his way to use his left foot instead of his right, but it was a wonderful pass with bend that almost could have easily been an assist. And so I'm enjoying Indy in the middle. And so I'm just going to say exactly what you said, except I'm going to start AZ on the left and just see how it goes with Indy in the middle. For some reason, I don't think they enjoy Indy on the left crossing in with his left foot. That's just me saying that and thinking that and guessing that. But that's what I say.
No, that's super fair because it changes what Indy does. It changes what he's asked to do and his entire game model in a way. And so if you don't like that Indy taking the ball deeper or higher up on the field and delivering service from wide areas, he's neutralized in a way. So I can completely understand that.
And I say this a lot, I'm sorry, but he likes to switch the field. And with Leuven out, like, Indy's kind of the next best guy for doing that. And I think he likes to do it on the right or shifting a little bit to the right and sending it to the left, which I think works. It's a far side of the goal kind of run. So great. That's it. What do you think on the score?
I've got I'm just going to keep going back to the well. We'll say 3-0 St. Louis.
I'm going to say, just because, and to be different from you, because of historically this season, the goals have not been going in waves. I think Chicago's not going to score against us because the defense was solid, and I'm going to say St. Louis gets 1. I'm going to say 1-0. I would love to see the floodgates open, though, on this one. Score one early and then see what happens.
I don't know if my nerves could take that.
I'm not saying I would enjoy it.
Pragmatic, though. Very pragmatic.
Yeah, pragmatic. Conservative. I'm not a good betting man. So, all right, that's it from us, guys. Thank you so much for joining us on the Big 550 KTRS. We're Flyover Footy. We're presented by Noble Ice Vineyards. Thank you again for joining us. We'll talk to you guys next week. Enjoy the game. Okay, I was going to hit a button, but I don't hit a button today.
No buttons hit. And for everybody on the live stream, stick around for a few minutes. We're going to do what we usually do, grab a drink, and let's talk some Marco Royce, right?
Oh, yeah, that's going to take a lot of it, isn't it?
Yeah. And listener questions. If you're tuning in on the live stream, toss us a question or something because we will get to it, I promise. Jeff Perry on X asked, what are the details with the pitch grass? How not ready is it? Well, if you ask the players, it's not ready. Klaus had a pretty harsh quote that we touched on earlier, like right at the beginning of the pod. Let me find it and I'll read it real quick. Yeah, Klaus said, unfortunately, the field is not ready yet. Outside, it looks good, but it's not ready. These are things we can't decide, but last time the field was in its best condition. So he's offering it from the player perspective specifically and doesn't feel like right now on Thursday that it's where it needs to be. But hopefully that can be corrected with a few days of sunlight and just some more time for the grass. But it is what it is, and both teams will have to deal with it. Oh, Santi's here.
Woo!
Santi,
Hi, guys.
What's up?
here for the wind down. Could not make it more perfect timing.
That's perfect.
I was listening to you guys like to the last 20 minutes or so.
Oh, nice.
Nice.
Good job. Good job.
Thanks. I listened to you guys in Puerto Rico for a little while, actually.
Oh, nice.
No, how was Puerto Rico?
Oh, wonderful. Your suggestions were all dead on. So thank you very much to
Great,
you and
great.
CC. We had a great time. We didn't get to see enough, and I knew that was going to happen. So that's fine. There's a lot to see in Puerto Rico.
No doubt.
How was your run? Was the run good?
Yeah, it was good.
Did you beat Jen?
Yeah, I did.
Oh, I did not mean to put her on blast like that.
I'm
Yeah.
glad you did.
But I think she did okay too. But yeah, it was fun. It was fun. Great turnout.
Battle of the City Broadcasters.
Yeah.
I like it. Cool. Well, Santiago, you ready to talk about Marco Royce?
Yes, although my dog may not be ready.
It must not be Berkey because Berkey's ready.
Right.
Yeah, it's Nina. It's the old dog.
Also, I don't have anything else to talk about specifically besides Royce. So if you guys have
Oh, yeah.
anything,
That'll cover it.
Yeah, I think we could talk about that for probably another 45 minutes, like another pod. But yeah,
Probably.
let's do it. It looks like Nina is okay, so let's do it.
Great. Welcome, everyone, to the wind down. Ooh. Oh my goodness. It was
that one had a little
fucking
extra
air.
to it.
Oh my gosh. Is it okay? Like, do we need to?
It's a Guinness.
I think you need to
Uh-oh.
perform some mouth to mouth.
Yeah, that one went a little extra right there. So that was a fun getting back into things.
It's that nitrogen, I guess. Is that
It
what
was. It was. Yeah, the folks on our live stream had a little treat, I suppose, on that.
Well,
On the drinking aspect, I said I actually gave blood today, so I'm drinking a Guinness Zero. But we should pour one out for, as Chris Gebhardt reminded us, former at one point most hated man in St. Louis, Enzo Capetti,
right.
is leaving Charlotte FC. He was the first MLS player to score a goal at City Park, and if you remember that very first game, he was quite the villain and earned a huge chorus of boos, and I think was one of the reasons that the St. Louis fans endeared themselves to the national landscape, to the players, because they really, really understood what he was doing and got onto him for it. So Enzo Capetti will always have a black place in our heart. But
A very dark corner of the room.
Right. We wish him something on his new adventures outside of MLS.
No one, Matt, your tweet was very nice today, but no one could beat Joseph Lowry's tweet about Capetti. I'm just going to read it word for word.
It was good.
Capetti's underlying numbers were mid before he got here, and both his underlying numbers and his box score stats were bad once he got here. Another in a long list of failed signings from Charlotte FC.
Wow.
Time to take another stab.
In their change from years 2 to 3, Charlotte not only had a new, well, I think they're on their third head coach now after their first one said that they are effed.
Right.
Or maybe the second one said that. I can't remember. Yeah, not a
Right.
great start. And they dumped 2 of their 3 DPs. Now their third one's gone. So they'll have a ton of room to do something with Dean Smith out there. And I think they're in 6th right now in the East. So they're somehow he's doing something right, and he's clearly wanting to put his own stamp on the team. But I'm done talking about Charlotte on this pod. We're done.
Yeah.
Can't do it
Let's
anymore.
move. Let's move. Let's make the fans happy. Let's talk about some Marco Royce. And I think the apt place to start, as it should always be when the roster is involved in conversations with players, is to start about talking about the roster rules. Like, Matt, how possible is this for a team like City? We just found out that there are 3 DPs officially being announced, being claimed by City to MLS, because MLS, I mean, this is probably something you've talked about a lot, but they released all the roster information for every single team, all 29 teams, all the roster information as is claimed by the team to the league. And I thought that was massive, and it helps this conversation.
Yeah, this was the part of the pod last week where I just went solo, and I went on a solo run, and I think I did okay. But the audio issue that we had last week really bummed me out. It was an exciting roster profile to have unleashed upon us. In particular, my favorite things that I think, looking back on it, that I like having out in the public knowledge is confirmation that, pertinent to this conversation, we have 3 designated players on the books for MLS right now: Joao Klaus, Eddie Leuven, and Roman Berkey. Roman Berkey is, we've been told, what MLS calls a restricted DP, even though that's, not like a term that they publicize, but it basically means max TAM. It's that player who's DP on paper only because it makes financial sense. It's the choice between, if Roman Berkey is not officially a DP, then we have to pay $1 million in TAM to buy down his salary to fit into our roster construction, or he's a DP and we pay $150,000 penalty to the league for having a third DP be a senior DP. It's not hard to figure out that math, and that's what the club's doing. So, from how this translates to Marco Royce is currently on a reported €7 million salary. It's about $7.5 million. And if we are able to find, if we're not able to buy him or negotiate with him down to a max TAM deal, then he would fit in as a third DP. Now, all that means is we would then have to buy down one of Roman Berkey or Edu Leuven, who are basically making the same amount of money when it comes to their hit on our cap. Roman Berkey, of course, max TAM, that's around 1.65, 1.68 million. Edu Leuven, the reason that he's able to be bought down is his salary and his amortized transfer fee. So Edu Leuven is on a salary of about $1.34 million, and he came to us for a reported $1.1 million transfer fee. Edu Leuven's contract started in 2022 and it ends in 2026. It's a 3.5-year contract. So you take that 1.1 million, you divide it by 3.5, and that's how much you add per year to his salary to find out his cap hit. And that is just under what Roman Berkey's salary is. So that's why Leuven can be bought down. He's under that max TAM threshold. And that's also why, when it comes to which player we would buy down in this scenario, Berkey or Leuven, it doesn't really matter. It's the same. It's basically the same amount. And so it's just for ease's sake, you'd think of Roman Berkey as that player you would buy down because he's a restricted DP. And so if we were to sign Royce for a DP salary, then the hit to us on our roster construction is an extra $1 million for Roman Berkey to buy down his salary to fit into the max budget. And so, do we have that TAM? By what we know available, I say yes, we do have that TAM.
The new rules help, right?
The new rules help. That's the other consideration, is if we were to sign Marco Royce, then per the new rules that still have yet to be fully ratified by the MLSPA.
True.
We would have 3 DPs, so we would only be able to have 3 U22s, and we do not get any extra GAM. So that's the biggest hit, is that $2 million in GAM that we would get if we only had 2 senior DPs is out the window. And that's part of the consideration. So when Lutz is in his war room looking at scenarios, because he's playing out the scenarios of what happens if we sign Royce. What happens if we sign Royce to a DP deal? What happens if we sign him to a max TAM deal? How can we make this work in the TAM and the GAM that we would get, but also in the roster rules and the availability for the upcoming changes? I think that this would be an investment for sure. And that might seem obvious, but it's not like it would be restricting or constricting us in our inability to sign anybody new for instance, next January. Like, this isn't saying if we sign Tuchert and we sign Royce both, then we're hamstrung and we don't have any wiggle room at all. I think we're more intentional about what our money is going towards for the next year and a half, 2 years, however long a Royce contract would look. But you also have to, I think you also have to take into consideration the like we said earlier, the talent, the caliber of player that is, and do you trust that his injury history would be worth the investment? Because I think any MLS team that looks to him, whether it's an East-West Coast team or St. Louis, has to weigh that injury risk, the age, to the overall investment it would take and the quality you would get on the field. So is that worth it in your system? For me, I lean towards, it would be worth it, because I see I know what Lutz has said in the past. I know that's not how he constructs his roster, but guys, this is one player. This isn't constructing your roster like Inter Miami with 5 or 6 mid-30 players. This isn't making him a fundamental piece for 3, 4, or 5 years. This is the exception to the rule, and every single rule has its exception. Marco Royce may be ours. And if you bring him in, you also have to think the leadership he's going to provide the team, the friendship with Berkey. Obviously, it's a satisfaction type thing for the best player on our roster. There's a lot that goes into this that's not just he's old and he has a history of injuries.
Agree. That's well said. Those are the easy overarching topics. Santiago, we haven't heard your opinion on Royce yet. I've given a bit. Matt's given a bit. What do you think?
Yeah, I have been thinking about it a lot. Initially, my first thought was no. There is no way he's going to be 35. His salary is probably too high. And I don't know, like maybe the team is not ready to have one player like this that is going to make way too much money compared to the rest of the players. But I have started to come around, but only if he signs a max time deal, which I wanted to ask you guys, what do you think the likelihood of that happening is?
You know, I'll go, because I think that delineation changes a lot of perceptions. If you get Marco Royce in a max TAM deal, suddenly, to me, the injury, the age becomes much less of a factor because you have the less investment. But it also kind of aligns with the OG thinking of Lutz, which is if you have a position that is vitally important to your team, the way that your style of play, that investment is worth the risk for a player who had aged out of their role in Europe. And that's Roman Berkey. Roman Berkey, like we said earlier, he didn't start for a year and a half at Dortmund before he left. Now, Lutz called him at his age more of the prime of a goalkeeper's career, which it's apples to oranges in that regard. But the fundamental concept of you bring in a player who was making $6.5 million, you put him on a max TAM deal because you convince him somehow to do it. I mean, that's a master stroke by Lutz to be able to do that. I don't put it out of the realm of possibility that he can do the same thing for Royce. And I don't know if I've heard that Royce isn't the type of player that is money hungry to the point where he's looking to cash in on one last contract for as much as humanly possible. It could be a quality of life thing. And if you're coming to St. Louis, who has perfect weather, I mean, we've heard it this week. St. Louis has perfect weather.
I see what you're doing there.
Thank you. But you're coming to play with your friend and a guy that you trust and respect like Lutz, and you have other Germans, other Western Europeans. And this has a feel that I think Royce would really appreciate. So you're selling him on all of that, in addition to the club, what you're building here with the culture, the opportunity to leave your footprint with this younger generation in St. Louis, what that means. I mean, it's a different type of a sell than a New York, a Miami, an LAFC would offer. Yeah. But I think it really tugs at, if I'm reading the right things about Royce, it tugs at a lot of the things that he seems to be about.
I agree. I want to tag on to that in that, I do think St. Louis City is going to give you that Bundesliga feel more than almost any team in MLS. I mean, maybe Philadelphia Union has a bit of that vibe to it as well. And maybe FC Cincinnati perhaps, but I don't know, if you're looking for that German feel, I really think that even the city of St. Louis, and the style of play that St. Louis presents, the workmanship, we're not a Dortmund, clearly, but we are not far from, like a Bochum that Leuven came from. Some of the mid-tier. Josh Sargent went to Werder Bremen because he said Bremen looked like St. Louis. He felt at home there. And so I do think that he could feel at home here, and it could be familiar. And we've seen all these star players who went to Saudi Arabia very much regretting their decision.
Yeah.
At least the press is making it seem that way, if it's not. And I'll just say that Firmino, when that rumor took off, didn't Lutz say, like, sometimes, yes, you have guidelines, you have ways that you build a roster, but you break the rules when something like this comes along.
Yeah.
He did.
So, I'm not worried about, he's not going to hold himself back. I thought you said that perfectly, Matt, just for the sake of the roster build or the rules he's given himself. So I'm not worried about that. Sounds like neither of you are as well. So, it's just the legs, right? It's the knees, it's the bones, the joints. Can he play 30 games? And honestly, alternatively, are we going to pay? I mean, Max Tam, yes. The answer is yes, right? But if it's not Max Tam, if he's a DP, are we okay with him playing 15, 20 games a year and paying that price?
For a DP, I would say no.
No, yeah. I wouldn't be okay.
The answer is no for that.
Was. Yeah.
You want to get the most out of your DP. So I would say no. But if St. Louis is able to pull that Max Tam deal with Berkey's help, which I'm gonna call it the Berkey discount,
yes,
and bring and
trademark that.
Yeah, ends up bringing Marco Royce. Yeah, I'm all in, and he's a little bit on the older side, but just think of the leadership he brings, and also his friendship with Berkey. A lot of times, when you're playing with your friends and you have that relationship, that also helps. So in that case, I will bring him, and I think St. Louis can convince him. Matt mentioned the quality of life, which is something that a lot of times is overlooked. Even with some of the players that have come to Miami, and they have also taken salary cuts, just for somebody who may be the last contract of their career, having the possibility of a year and a half down the road, getting a green card and having the flexibility to live in the States, that's a big plus. So I think that will also help St. Louis or any other team that wants to sign him. I think MLS is attractive because of that too.
So let me ask you guys something. Santi, I want to pick up on what you just said of you wouldn't be satisfied with Royce coming in and playing 15 to 20 games. Now, I agreed. In general, that concept of you pay a lot of money for a player that plays half or less than half of your games, it doesn't tend to be worth it. It's a pretty easy sell of an idea, right? But let's think about specifically St. Louis City and our current roster. We have open roster slots. We're not utilizing a couple of our roster slots right now. So we still have people that we can sign without any impact on our current roster. And we can even bring in a couple players. So we could bring in Tuchert and Royce. But more so, let's say we pay a DP salary. At that point, it doesn't matter how much. It's a DP slot, right? It doesn't matter if it's $2 million, doesn't matter if it's $6 million. It's a DP slot. Let's say we do that, and Royce ends up giving us 15 to 20 games, but he still plays like Marco Royce in those 15 to 20 games. And he's taking a spot right now of looking at it, Phil in my lineups earlier, he's taking a spot right now of AZ or Indy.
Yeah.
And would you not take 15 to 20 games of Marco Royce in this existing roster? Would he not elevate us that much for what 15 or 20 games could work out to be 30 points?
Yeah, if he delivers the assist and some of the goals in those 15, 20 games, and then you think about you have AC, you have Indy, and you have a way to rotate, yeah, maybe at that point is worth paying for those 15-20 games if he's gonna be delivering on most of those games. If he's gonna get the production, yeah.
And I guess it's my whole point in bringing that up is that I know that on social media, especially, there's a lot of knee jerks. There's a lot of like hot takes on a very particular thing of, I don't want to pay a ton of money. I don't want to use up a DP slot that we could otherwise use, which is a concept that I struggle to really buy into because Lutz just said like 2 or 3 months ago, he's not looking to sign a DP contract. So
Right.
if Marco Royce ends up being the exception to all of the roster build, the alternative to Marco Royce is not filling that spot with another DP of his caliber. The alternative is to not fill that slot at all and to look at Cedric Tukert as your shining star and the top player that you're potentially going for. Now, I'm not discounting the fact that we can't go for both or that Royce is better or worse than Tukert. I'm just saying that when you think about concepts like we shouldn't sign Royce because of the injury risk and the only potential to only play a handful of games or 15, 20 games, there's no alternative when it comes to DP level spending, at least from what we've been told.
But my thing, if he becomes a DP and is a big investment, is that risk and reward. And let's say he gets injured and doesn't deliver. Like if it is a big investment, at least to me personally, I would rather invest that money in a couple of U22 players that have a future and have a higher likelihood of adapting to MLS and delivering, and maybe 2-3 years down the road, you're able to sell them to another country. So if it becomes too expensive, I would rather go the U22 route.
Yeah, I agree. I agree with that.
Yeah, I was gonna say I'm sold on exactly that, and it's not just that you want young players over old players. It's also kind of betting on yourself, right? Like you think you can bring in some guys with potential, and not just like have them do well, but to make them better, improve them, improve their worth, and sell them on, like you said. Like I think that's something that St. Louis City can be amazing at and wants to be amazing at. And that's part of why I'm with you. You and I hammer it more than anyone else that we don't have more U22s right now is kind of killing us, because I do think that's something they could be very good at and want to be good at.
Well, the other thing we found out in this roster profile is we actually have 2 U22s on our roster.
Yeah,
right.
That was fun.
Right.
Yeah.
We knew we had Chris Durkin, who his designation came in the trade, but we found out that Isak Jensen is on a U22 contract. So 2 of our 3 U22 slots are taken.
We've mentioned that before, and we've never settled on him being one, and I don't remember why now.
Well, so I think we figured it out, and it boils down to we didn't ask the right questions. I've asked the club, is Isak Jensen a young designated player? Because at one point he was listed on the MLS website as a young DP.
Yeah.
And we never understood how that could be the case, because his salary doesn't really add up to making much sense for a young DP. Now, it is a cost savings for a U22. It's like a $150,000 savings because he's on a U22 contract and he's 19 years old. So it's not chump change. It's meaningful. But I think it boils down to we didn't ask the right question on that U22 aspect.
I think we also thought he wasn't making enough for it to matter.
Yeah, Isak Jensen, his salary, let me pull it up real quick, looks to be around 230,000. And a U22 if he's under 22 years old when he signs his U22 contract, or let me rephrase that. While he's under 22 on his U22 contract, he has a $150,000 cap hit. So that's half of his overall salary.
Okay.
Durkin has a $200,000 cap hit, and Durkin makes $481,000. So still a pretty massive savings for Durkin, because Durkin's older than age 22. So there's difference under 22 versus like 22 to 25 years old. You have that difference in hit. What that does as far as the context of Royce and even Tukert is right now it goes into the new upcoming rules, because you're looking at, if you fill this third DP slot with a senior DP, then you only get 3 U22s and no extra GAM. If you don't fill this third DP slot with a senior DP, you have 2 DPs, you get 4 U22s, and you get $2 million in GAM. And so to Santi's point of if you choose not to pay DP salary for Royce, then you kind of better fill the roster with some U22s and leverage that position, not just because it's betting on your future and your development, but there's so massive of salary cap implications to that you're not taking advantage of. Now, St. Louis right now is taking advantage of 2 of those 3, which is fine. It's a lot better than what we thought we were at in the offseason. So I'm okay with that concept. But it does go to my point of if we're looking at not wanting to sign Royce to a DP deal because we think we're going to sign a DP in his place that's younger, we're dreaming. Yeah. Now, if we want to look to U22s, that's a totally different story. And I'm all on board that line of thinking. I just want it to come to fruition sooner rather than later. And we've had this conversation over and over of when the time's right, the time's right. I don't want to sign a U22 just to fill a slot. It needs to be the right U22. So on and so forth. And obviously that's difficult. That's a difficult concept for us to continuously look at and be so anxious and impatient about. But just because a slot is open for a transfer window or 2 doesn't mean it will not have been worth it once we do fill it with a player that will be meaningful for years to come.
Yeah. I think another I have a couple more thought processes here, and one being that, do we want to bring in a Royce at the cost of guys like AZ, Ostrak, even an academy player not getting as much time? That's always, every time you bring in someone high dollar, that means you're losing production value from your younger players. And so that's another one to kind of keep in mind every time we get starry-eyed. That is something that I think about 3 days later. Is like, who's losing minutes at the cost of Royce playing?
It's such a tough conversation too, right? Because it's the here and now, the higher likelihood of succeeding because of the proven talent that a guy like Royce can bring. But you have a player like AZ and even Indiana Vasilev, who's on upward trajectories.
Yeah.
And you don't want to stymie them. You don't want to stifle that.
Yeah.
And so then you're looking at still getting them playing time in that type of a role, which goes back to this conversation of the number of games played. And you're looking at a guy like AZ or Indy, one or the other, having 30-minute sub opportunities for a majority of the season.
I'm also curious, like, what revenue streams can we garner Messi style off the books for Royce? So I looked it up. Marco Reus, like most Dortmund players, is a Puma athlete, right? He's aligned with Puma. So hopefully that won't go away. Like, that could be a deal breaker in itself.
Wow.
So he would have to be able to represent Puma, even though he's wearing Adidas. I don't know what the rules are on kicks, but it sounded like you had something there, Matt.
Well, Lutz is Mr. Puma.
They have something in common.
Yeah, I'm sure he could make something happen.
Okay, so no big deal there. So maybe we can enhance this Puma deal some more to bring him to the United States. But like, what other stuff can he do? I don't know if like
let's get him some local commercials
down for that. But I know the United States has money coming out of its ears in the corporate world. So I don't know what else we can throw his way off the books to get him here.
Remember when we were trying to get an MLS team to begin with, and you had all of these business leaders coming together and pledging their support for the team and saying, we're going to financially back this. They're going to be well supported. I'm sure we can rally the troops again for Marco Reus and say, all right, Marco Reus, you're going to be the new king of carpets. Marco Reus, you're going to be the new Square Beyond Compare spokesperson. I'm sure there's lots of things that we could put him into. That
I was thinking him in a Square commercial would be pretty good. Maybe Purina. I don't know. Like, what are the biggest? I mean, Centene's not going to want to use them. I'm trying to think of St. Louis corporations that could throw some money at him.
I'm sure we could put him on a jet, and Boeing can do something.
Oh, there we go. Yeah,
yeah.
I had to bring Stews in here for that, but I think. I think there's some innovative things that we could do off the books that might entice him. In addition to the homie aspect, the non-financial aspect we were talking about earlier, but we can make it worth his while.
And Matt, I apologize. We talked about how sometimes I zone out and think about the format of the show, or I get lost in my thoughts. I apologize if you talked about this, but like international slots, bringing in Tukert and Royce, this isn't a problem?
It depends on if you want to bring back our loaned players or not.
Yeah.
We currently have one open international slot, but we also have 2 loaned players who would take up an international slot. Now, I don't feel the likelihood of us bringing either of them back is particularly strong.
Right.
We have 10 international players rostered, and we have 9 international slots. That works because 2 of them are on loan, and so they don't take up an active slot while they're on loan. So we talked about this before too. So but for various reasons, I don't think Pedro's coming back, and I don't think Jensen's coming back. Vastly different reasons. As such, we do have 1 international slot. So either or Tukert or Royce can find their way to City. But once you get into this summer window and the transfer window opens, you can just acquire another slot. So it would cost us another probably $200,000 to $250,000 in GAM, depending on what team we traded with. Maybe as low as 150. Nashville. I think they only have 6 left. They're scraping the barrel on their international slots.
All right, so that's not a worry. That's
not a huge worry. No.
Cool. I didn't think so. That was my last thought.
Well, the other thing I don't think we really touched on too much is the just scenarios for Royce and Tukert to be signed, because if you look at reports, Cedric Tukert is not making worldy money.
Right.
You know, with Hanover in the 2 Bundesliga, his wages are a little over or around $850,000 a year. So if you say he stays consistent to that, or even up or down a little bit, that puts him in Thomas Ostrak to Joachim Nilsson range. Mm-hmm. And so he would be a TAM player, not max TAM, just a TAM player. And coming on a free transfer, I think that's palatable for the TAM reserves that we have, knowing that we have not been spending $2 million in TAM on Roman Berkey's salary for the salary cap. Because the initial thought is, if Roman Berkey's not a DP, we're paying $1 million in TAM each year he's on our books to buy him down. Now we know that we're not doing that. And so we have extra TAM that I didn't think we had that can be utilized for Tukert and potentially, if he's on a max TAM deal, Marco Royce. So there's an easy path to say we can sign both of these players if Royce agrees to this type of a deal. It becomes a little more frustrating if he's a DP, but the money in roster construction is there. But for obvious reasons, it would just be a little bit of a different approach that we've already talked about.
We got some good comments on commercial opportunities for Royce. Chris Gebhardt says, I don't think Emos has Puma money for commercials. That's definitely true. Byron Tim says, quote, it really is good, guys. Quote, end quote. Royce on Ted Drews. Like, so good. Well done, sir. Colton Cook. Beer companies, like, why didn't I think about him doing like a Michelob Ultra commercial? That's obvious, right? That should be, done. Or put him in an Audi. MLS and Audi are very close. Yeah, that would be nice to see. That's I know true. Lutz got a nice Audi when he first came here, right? That was fun for the Super Draft, maybe.
Yeah, you could easily get him on one of those beer commercials. Michelob Ultra is the obvious one, but there's plenty that he could do. That would be something that would be like a cross promoting him here and in Germany.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Oh, that'd be perfect. Yeah. Jump on that international bandwagon. It could be broadcast in every country around the world. It would fit right in.
Exactly.
There is something we haven't touched on, and I haven't been checking our time, so I apologize, but I think we could do 10-15 minutes on this if we want. We haven't talked about, can Royce keep up with the style of play? Let's dig into it, because he's moving from Dortmund they run their butts off to some extent, but that's not his style, perhaps. But can he do it? Will he do it? Would we ask him to do it? The city style, the high pressing style, to whatever degree we high press anymore.
I think he can do it for a limited amount of minutes. I don't, like I said earlier, he's not going to be asked to play 90 minutes if he comes here.
Right.
I don't think he ever plays a full 90 minutes in a game if he comes here. But how big of a deal is that? I mean, how big of a deal is that Celio Pompeu, Indiana Vassilev, AZ, Rasmus Alm, they've played very few 90-minute games, but you think of them as quality starters. Mm-hmm. And so that's not what we ask of our attackers, is to play 90 minutes all the time. I don't think it's that big of a deal if he doesn't do that. Like I said, we have open roster slots that are playing 0 minutes per game. So,
Yeah.
you know, and if he's, that's one, so that's a fundamental criteria of mine. So there's some things in this conversation where you have to take it with assuming that Lutz is doing his due diligence, because everything that he's done so far gives you a sense that he does. It's obvious. Like Lutz is not going to bring in a player who would not thrive in our system. Mm-hmm. Talent of Marco Reus or not, goal scoring, chance creation capabilities or not. If he can't play two-way soccer and defend on the front foot, he's not going to play for us. And so the fact that we appear to be pursuing him, or at least initially reaching out or discussing, tells me that there is at least the thought that he can keep up with the St. Louis City style of play. And let's not mince words. The quality of play in MLS is not near the same level as the Bundesliga. Mm-hmm. In fact, when you look on FB Ref and you see Marco Reus's stats and you see his comparables to attacking mids and midfielders, and you look at the fact that he's in the 90th plus percentile in various chance creation, shot taking, clearance, tackles, all of these different metrics against other attacking midfielders in top 5 Champions League, Europa League competitions, that's incredible, because you juxtapose that against like Celio Pompeu, Indiana Vasilev, AZ Jackson, who have their comparables on FB Ref against the next 14 leagues in the world, which MLS is a part of. And their comparable numbers percentile wise are markedly lower than Marco Reus's. And so it's not just that Reus has these metrics that are lining up good for his position in comparison to City. It's not even comparing apples to apples because of the competition they're being measured on. Like, take Marco Reus's, and if you really compare it to all the players on St. Louis City, they would be legitimately off the charts in percentiles. That's the kind of player, coupled with the inherent assumption that if Lutz is bringing a player into this system, he is not going to bring in a player who can't do what you're asking that position to do.
And I'll just argue that Reus does run hard. Mm-hmm. And it could be contributing to his injury. So then you start asking yourself that question. Sure, but that's step 2. Can he run hard? The answer is yes. I watch a decent amount of Dortmund. In fact, maybe we need to bring the BVB podcast guys on to talk about that. That would actually be a lot of fun. We need to do that.
We were talking about that today.
Santi and I were just talking about getting Carver on here.
Carver on here for sure. Yeah, it's got to happen. So that's in the works for sure. I'll start working on that tomorrow. But yeah, I mean, the answer is yes, right? On top of everything Matt said, the quality that is therein, yes, he can run, and yes, he does run. And even like looking at things that Bradley Carnell says, we're better when we play angry. You look at that, like, can he say that to Reus? Mm-hmm. And will Reus do it? The answer, I think, is yes. He's a team player. He doesn't have an ego. I think that's pretty clear in the way that he plays at Dortmund. He's been there for so long. He's seen so many young kids come and go, and he's just been that guy that's always been there, and he's always been a leader. He's always been a good soldier, even when he gets injured, even when he comes back after a long injury. He comes back and he delivers for that team. So I think he would do that for City. And I do think he would enjoy the fans pushing him and enjoy even Bradley Carnell pushing him. And let's be honest, do you think Berkey's going to let him slack? Because I don't.
No.
So I think he can handle it. All those things said, I think he'd be just fine.
Yeah, I think he'll be able to do it for sure. The key is, as Matt said, for how long. The other thought is, in some games you could use him as a super sub for the last 35 minutes or so. But yeah, the fact that I was just thinking about the fact that he never left Dortmund just shows his commitment and his work ethic. So yeah, I think that can be translated into City's principles, and he will be able to fit in.
Agree.
On the running aspect, so if you look up Marco Reus's stats for the 2023-2024 Bundesliga season, in which he had 24 appearances, 16 starts. You know, City loves to track their intensive runs and all of those types of stats. He had in 24 appearances, 16 starts, 457 sprints, 1,308 intensive runs. He covered 187 kilometers, and he had a total speed, or looks like an average speed, kilometers per hour of 31.49. So average those out into 24 games, knowing that 8 of them were subs, or 8 of them were subs.
Yep.
That's at the level still where you would be impressing in MLS. You're looking at I think 19, an average distance of 7.79 kilometers per game, 7.79 kilometers per game, average distance. You have about 19 sprints per game and about 54 or so intensive runs per game. This guy still runs. He might not be asked to start every game in the Bundesliga, and so fitness would still need to be worked up and managed appropriately, but he's no slouch. And the numbers that he's doing in the Bundesliga back that up, and compare that to the level of play of MLS, you still have to think it would translate really well.
I completely agree. I think that's it from us, guys. You guys feel good about that conversation? I sure do. We covered roster details. Can Reus play with us? Should Reus play with us? How much would we pay him? I think it's been fun. I think we've covered all the basics at the very least.
The last stat that I will have, because I got to get one more stat in.
I like it.
And it's Chris Gebhardt said that we're far more selective in our pressing this year as opposed to last season. The numbers back that up. St. Louis no longer leads the league in passes per defensive action. They're not tied first or second like they were last year with the New York Red Bulls. They are the 5th lowest. And I was comparing them to Chicago. Chicago's 13th lowest. But St. Louis they're allowing about 3 more passes per defensive action, and going from around a 9 to around a 12. And that is being more selective in when they choose to initiate that first defensive action. PPDA, passes per defensive action, the number of passes you allow a team before you engage them in your first defensive action. So being a little more intensive, or being a little more intentional in when you're choosing to start your attack and you're engaging the ball, that's been a part of this growth of St. Louis. And so maybe last year, in the all-out absolute craziness of trying to be Red Bull Light or energy drink light soccer, there could have been an argument of, okay, this is a lot, but we're still doing all of the pressing. But we're being smarter about it. And part of that growth could align really well with everything we've talked about Marco Reus joining City.
All right. Well, that's it from us, guys. We're Flyover Footy. Thank you so much for listening to us on the wind down. I've really enjoyed today's conversation, and I will just close with the fact that Flyover Footy does not endorse in any way leaving on Marco Reus's doorstep a giant bag of cash, in his driveway an Audi RS7, in his fridge a lifetime supply of Busch Bavarian. And we also do not endorse making him an honorary captain of Lufthansa airline for life. Those are things we do not endorse, and no one should do. So,
to be clear,
that's it from us, guys.